I would now like to ask Marc Hemies to come forward in the panel, Doug Mills and Marc.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah, we've got
Turn the floor over to you.
Marc Brazeau. I saw you were online. Hi, Marc. This next session is titled Modal Impacts of Supply Chains Disruptions. Probably kind of melds into the last conversation in many ways. I think over the last 5 years or more, we've seen an endless list of disruptions to the Canadian transportation system and the supply chain. It runs the gamut of challenges ranging from environmental rivers to wildfires, rail line blockades, labor strikes, walkouts. While all of the participants, I think, feel the pain of these events, shippers and carriers and ports, none see the attention or the strife more than the railways and the ports. And for that reason, I think Barry wanted to get somebody from a railway and somebody from a port. And I think we've got two really good representatives of that. Our first speaker is going to be Marc Brazeau, who's the president and the CEO of the Railway Association of Canada. Marc is the president of the RAC, and it represents close to 60 freight and passenger railways, transporting millions of passengers and over $380 billion of goods each year. He brings close to 30 years of experience in the transportation industry to his leadership role with the RAC. Prior to that, he was the VP of Sales and Marketing at Uniselect, where he brought significant growth to the North American auto parts distributor. And previous to that, he was the president and CEO of the Automotive Industries Association of Canada, where he was responsible for delivering a number of important industry initiatives and programs. He's a graduate in public relations from Humber College and holds a Bachelor of Arts in Communications from the University of Ottawa. Marc, the floor is yours. I don't know whether you have a presentation, but you can share it.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you, Barry, and others for the invitation to be here. Let me just try to bring up my presentation here. All right. Okay. Again, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be part of this great event. And again, kudos to the organizers. I've not been able to be on the on all the presentations, but what I've heard and what I've been able to gain so far is a lot of very, very valuable insights that's being provided by a number of speakers, and rail has come up once or twice, so it's always good to be part of the conversation. Just quickly, I think the numbers there speak for themselves in terms of the size, the scope, the impact that Canadian Railways continue to have on the economy, on the jobs, on the investments, on the ability to move people and goods. And, the one thing that I think we should all be proud of is the fact that we have two world-class Class 1 railways in Canada, in CN and CPKC. Both of these railways employ over 35,000 dedicated railroaders, men and women who, in some cases, are third, fourth generation railroaders. So it's in their blood. These are employees who, run 24/7, 365 days a year, regardless of weather, regardless of the challenges. We always say, railroading is an outdoor sport, and it certainly is in Canada. And, these railroaders, these thousands of railroaders, dedicated railroaders, bring essential goods to market safely and efficiently. I think it was noted in the opening remarks, $380 billion worth of goods, freight annually, which represents half of Canada's exports. Freight railways really are the veins through which our economy pulses. And again, I think that came out in several of the comments, the importance of railways and how we keeping Canada's economy moving forward. So I think, again, Canada's railways are efficient, they're well-performing, they're cost-effective, and we do have some of the lowest freight rail rates worldwide. And again, I think that's something that, we can take some level of comfort in knowing that not only of our goods getting to market safely, but they're getting to markets in a very cost-effective way. I'll just bring up the next slide here. So just maybe focusing a little bit more on the ag sector. I think, again, if we look at the performance of the grain shipments in the last 4 or 5 years, we did obviously see a dip in 2021, 2022. It was not a good crop year. There were some challenges there, but fairly consistent in terms of how much grain is shipped by rail, how much grain gets to world markets as a result of railways. Again, I think the ability to ship grain seamlessly across North America, across Canada, and being exported globally, that is something that the railways take very serious as part of their contribution to ensuring that our ag community and our farmers across Canada are able to get their products to world markets. Certainly the ability to ship by train is a critical one. And, we are giving farmers greater market access. We are contributing to the growth of the Canadian grain industry. And I can tell you that in week 17 of the 2024 crop year, both CN and CPKC continue to deliver strong service with more than 1.1 million metric tons of grain transported during week 17 alone. So again, agriculture relies on rail to reach its destinations. And I think with the investments that have been made over the last several years by both Class 1s in new grain, high-capacity grain hopper cars, which are built at National Steel Car in Hamilton, Ontario, again demonstrates the importance of reinvesting back in the network and then having the ability to carry more Canadian ag products to world markets, and again, to do that in a very efficient, cost-effective way. It is a very diversified freight portfolio. Railways move a variety of goods, ranging from essential exports like grain and potash to crucial forest products and critical minerals. Again, having an efficient, safe network is paramount here to making sure that all of these Canadian-made or Canadian minerals, Canadian products get to the trading markets that they need to get to. In 2023, as was in the case in 2022, intermodal, minerals, fuels, and chemicals and agriculture were the largest grouping of carloads transported by Canada's railways, as you can see in the chart, accounting for over 3/4 of total carloads. So again, intermodal, minerals, fuels, and chemicals and ag, those were the big components of the total carloads in 2023. In fact, in 2023, there were 5 commodity groupings that experienced increases in carloads. Ag was up 23.5%. Machinery and automotive was up 34.5%. Coal was up 8%. Food products was up 20%, and minerals was slightly up a little over 1%. So again, we saw a lot of growth in 2023 versus 2022. And as this chart illustrates, fairly diversified portfolio there in terms of the types of commodities, the types of products that are moved by rail. But again, all of these represent significant contributions to jobs, to the economy, and to Canada's ability to continue to be seen as an important export market to the world. I think there was mention of the costs in one of the earlier conversations, and there was a study done by commissioned by REC, but an independent study done by CPCS, internationally recognized market consulting firm, and in that study, it clearly indicated that Canada was very competitive in comparisons to other countries, and the apples to apples comparison, obviously, U.S. is always one that we track very closely, 11% lower than the U.S. in terms of freight rates. But then when you look at the MRE, the maximum revenue entitlement for grain shipments, that rate was even lower on average. And that represented actually 29% lower than the average Canadian freight rate. So again, just putting the emphasis on the fact that, yeah, our railways are able to ship large quantities of products, especially ag products. and we're able to do that in a very cost competitive environment. And again, Canada ranking as one of the the countries that has the lowest freight rail rates in the world. So something that we want to continue to make sure that we're seen as being very competitive, and again meeting the needs of the ag community in Canada in a very competitive fashion. There are a number of challenges. There are a number of headwinds, however, and again, we've probably talked on most of these, if not all of these, already in previous conversations. But again, I think labor challenges, and I take Robert's point to heart here in terms of the international reputation that I think has been certainly damaged. We've had a lot of labor disruptions in the last 12 to 24 months in this country. Whether it be at ports, whether it be at railways, whether it be airlines, there has been a number of labor disruptions, and I think that is something that we as a country, as our elected leaders, the business leaders as well, union leaders, we all need to recognize that this is something that cannot be maintained in terms of the frequency. In terms of the number of labor work stoppages that have taken place, and we believe that there are some measures that can be put in place, whether it be changes to the Canada Labor Code, whether it be looking at best practices in other jurisdictions, for example, the U.S. with the Railway Labor Act, and the ability for them to deal with the potential for shutting down an entire supply chain within a country. I think, again, someone commented on that earlier, that, we can't, as a country, we got to have some ability to maintain and to keep our supply chains open, especially when it comes to having, an impact on jobs and the economy in such a widespread way. We have to answer the call there in terms of making sure that we get back to an environment of stability and predictability when it comes to supply chains. And again, we've seen a fair share of challenges when it comes to work stoppages in the last couple of years. So I think, again, that's certainly a major headwind. An uncertain regulatory environment. Again, we're of the opinion here that in order to encourage investments, in order to ensure long-term planning, there needs to be a certain amount of certainty and predictability on the regulatory side. And we've seen a kind of a re-creeping of regulations in the last couple of years. And again, I think the mindset has to be, how do we drive investments? How do we continue to improve the capacity within the supply chain? It's best done when there is some public policy that encourages that. When there is the need for, again, maintaining a regulatory environment that's fair, that's predictable, that's evidence-based. Again, we see that as an opportunity to look at things differently, to make sure that we create a more investment-focused environment. And again, that's a headwind that I think we've all seen the last couple of years. On the U.S. side, with 2026, the CUSMA or USMCA up for renegotiation. You've got President-elect Trump taking office in late January. I think, again, if you look at President Trump and his approach in the past, and certainly some of the statements and comments that have come out recently, is that he's going to be very strategic in negotiating the power of tariffs to maximize U.S. interests. But I also think that his overarching goal will be to continue to make sure that there is economic growth in this country, and I think cross-border trade certainly represents a significant portion of revenues for railways, but it represents a significant part of Canada's total GDP, and we need to make sure that Canada and the U.S. and Mexico, that we continue to have bilateral trade agreements that are going to favor North America as a whole. And so while there's some headwinds there, I think, again, if you look at history, that there, will be some, hard negotiations, some hard decisions made. But I think we all want the same thing, and that is having a North American economy that is fully integrated and is going to have an ability to grow and prosper as we go forward. Extended regular interswitching, that did come up again, I think in one of the presentations. We continue to be concerned with the impact on unionized jobs. From 2014 to 2017, when there was a pilot project in place, it became very clear as the extended regular interswitching was maintained, that it was having a domino effect on thousands of carloads being sent to the U.S. via BNSF. And that's just not an impact on railway jobs. That's an impact on port jobs. So the longer this pilot project takes or stays in place, then the impact becomes real. Again, it's on jobs, it's on investments, because if extended regular interswitching is favoring a U.S. railway over a Canadian railway, then the Canadian railways are in a position where they have to make decisions on their own investment decisions. And if they don't see a fair return on investing more in Canada because of extended regular interswitching, then capital flows south. I mean, capital flows where there's the highest return on your investments, and where regulations or public policy favors return on those investments. So we're really concerned that extended regular interswitching, if it continues beyond the pilot timeline, the pilot project timeline, which is March of 2025, that we're going to continue to see the same negative impacts that we saw from 2014 to 2017, which was when the pilot projects is in place longer and longer, there's more traffic diverted south, and the beneficiary of that are the U.S. Class 1 railways, in particular BNSF. Increased dwell times, it's no big secret that the ranking of some of our ports in Canada have not been stellar in the last couple of years. Port dwell times have increased significantly, averaged 157 hours in 2022. There's some things that can be done in terms of investments. We have been advocating that ports should be operating 24/7, like other parts of the supply chain. We need to make investments to ensure that things like loading grain in the rain at the Port of Vancouver can be done safely and efficiently, like it is at Seattle or like it is at Portland. Those are things that are facing us as a challenge within our supply chain. But there are some solutions, and again, investments can go a long way in addressing some of those challenges. And then finally, I think we all, again, I think it was brought up earlier. We continue to deal with climate change, extreme weather conditions, whether it be forest fires, whether it be extreme cold, whether it be floods. We have to make sure that our infrastructure, as we build more infrastructure out, will be able to withstand some of those extreme climate conditions. And again, as a country, we've got a lot to lose here if we do not continue to invest, but also invest smartly and invest for the long term to make sure that our infrastructure can withstand the challenges that, again, we've seen here in the last several years here in Canada. At the end of the day, it's collaboration that really is going to allow us to ensure that our supply chains continue to be fluid, that we continue to expand capacity. So again, addressing the labor challenges, I mentioned the solutions for loading grain in the rain in Vancouver. Precise and accurate customer demand forecasts. I know that Robert Dick and his office and his people are working very closely on that issue. Modal integration programs. There are some jurisdictions like Quebec, for example, where being able to have some incentives to move traffic from road to rail. The benefits of that, the benefits on public infrastructure, the benefits to the environment, the benefits from a safety point of view. There's some modal shift incentives that can be advanced here, and ensuring that we continue to maximize our supply chains, and we continue to do it in a very green way, which rail is obviously the greenest mode of transportation that we can have. Capital cost allowance rates, again, creating that environment where businesses will be incentivized to invest in their infrastructure, to invest in the supply chains. We have made several representations to the federal government, to Revenue Canada, the importance of ensuring that we stay competitive with respect to our U.S. counterparts who have had significant incentives built in the last couple of years under the Biden administration. We need to make sure that Canada remains competitive, that we incentivize more investments, and certainly capital costs allowance rates is one area that we've focused on and have made some recommendations there. And then, support for short lines. Canada's short line railways play that critical first mile, last mile function. There are over 60 short line railways in Canada. The one challenge that they face day in and day out is the ability to reinvest in our network. They don't have the same ability to reinvest like their Class 1s do, Class 1 counterparts. So there needs to be some dedicated programs put in place in Canada where short lines can benefit from a tax credit so that they can then reinvest in their network and do so with the knowledge that they're going to be able to generate tax credits as a result of those investments. And the reason why that's important is we've seen what it's done in the U.S. There is a dedicated program that exists in the U.S. For some time now, the 45G program, the CRISI program. And that is a program that has been working very, very well in the U.S. And it's allowed a lot of U.S. short line railways to expand, to grow capacity, to make sure that their network remains fluid and safe. And they've been able to do that because of these incentives and these tax credits that they've been able to benefit from for a number of years. So it's time that we bring that concept into Canada. And again, we've seen some good traction from several levels of government, including the Ontario government, which had it in their budget earlier this year, where they've made a commitment to put together a program to support short lines in Ontario. And we've had discussions with the federal government, but we believe here if we can get Ontario on board, there could be a domino effect there with other provinces, because again, we've got short lines across the country that are looking for an opportunity to reinvest in their network more, but there needs to be some incentives. And again, the U.S. example of the impacts of that in the U.S. has been very clear and very beneficial. Again, the importance of having efficient borders, making sure that the products that are leaving Canada flow efficiently. We've got over 100 trains across the Canada-U.S. border daily, and those trains are moving $500 million worth of goods daily. And in 2023 alone, railways moved over $171 billion worth of Canadian goods across the Canada-U.S. border. So the importance of this movement can't be overstated. And these goods, whether it be automotive, chemicals, metals, minerals, agricultural products, forest products, petroleum, fertilizer, it accounts for a significant portion of our trade with the U.S. and obviously trade with that it's moving through the U.S. to another country as well, for example, Mexico. So again, making sure that our borders are efficient, making sure that we continue to have trade agreements that's going to allow Canada, U.S., Mexico to continue to benefit from this flow of trade without the threat of additional tariffs. And then finally, railways work very closely with their customers, whether it be the Class 1s, whether it be the short lines, the relationship that exists there between the railways and their customers to accommodate for disruptions or changing trade patterns. It's the constant communications, the constant updates. That is something that I know that our railways take very seriously in terms of that relationship, and it's something that is ongoing on a daily basis here, again, to make sure that customers are getting the service and the support that they need. And then as a country, I think the railways, again, will continue to ensure that Canada continues to be a trading nation, that we have stable supply chains, that the rail industry continues to be a significant driver of economic growth. We're going to continue to invest billions of dollars annually to enhance safety, to enhance efficiency, support the growth of Canadian business, and at the same time provide for well-paying unionized jobs across the country. And again, these are benefits for Canada. Is ensuring that we have that reliable service, competitive freight rail rates, and that we are world-class by all measures, including in safety, environmental innovation, and service performance. So I'm going to leave it at that, and happy to take any questions, or I guess we might go to the next presentation.
Well, there is one question on the chat.
Okay.
It's asking if you have dwell time data for the year 2023 or any information on trends over recent years.
We did a deeper dive, I'm going to say about 18 months ago, on port dwell times. I'd be happy to share that study. It was a paper that we did. One of our team members did a study on that, and I don't know. Yeah, Jonathan, I think it just saw a comment come up there. So that is something that we're happy to share. But it's not 2023 data. It would be based on, I believe, 2021 or 2022 data.
Okay. I was quickly looking at grain monitoring data on what dwell times were, but I hadn't got that far yet.
Jump in if you like.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Hey, yeah. So the report Marc's mentioning covers the period up to 2022, and we are looking at we're going to be pulling the data soon on 2023. Just at a high level, the port dwell data, it's come down a bit from 2022. So it's in 2023 it averaged 113 hours, so still elevated compared to the pre-pandemic period, but there's an improvement over 2022. And then on the rail side, it's been pretty consistent, remaining below 10 hours on rail terminal dwell. And then we also take a bit of a look at the marine vessel delays, and those are still quite elevated since the pandemic. So that affects kind of the whole supply chain with things coming into Canada.
I was just looking at total Western ports as of the first quarter of this year is at 12 hours. So for grain.
For grain, okay.
For grain. Any questions come up? I'm sure that there will be some by the time we get through Doug's presentation.
I'm around.
Yeah, great. We'll bring Doug up into the conversation. I see there he's working from home today. Doug Mills is the senior account representative for the Vancouver and Fraser Port Authority. He brings more than 40 years of experience to his work at the Fraser Port Authority in marine, road, air modes of transportation. I should say that Doug is probably one of the more informed people that we can deal with at the port. He has been there for quite a long time and has great knowledge of the entire industry. He joined in 2000. He served in the statistics group, in the shore operations, and the supply chain and trade development departments at the port, where he's currently holding that position. And he's responsible for bulk, break bulk, export container, cargo and the cargo sectors. Cargo commodities in Doug's portfolio includes coal, potash, grain, sulfur, forest products, steel, project cargoes, liquid bulk products. He's born and raised in Vancouver, and he has a bachelor's degree in business and liberal arts from Simon Fraser University, as well as a diploma in marketing management, technology, and transportation distribution management from BCIT. Doug, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marc. And thank you, Barry, for the invitation to come and speak with everybody today. I was just pining that I've been coming here now, I got to say it's over 15 years. And one of the things that draws me to attend these sessions is the level that this particular group brings transportation up into the discussion. And unlike many others, it's a common feature that is often discussed in detail. And I enjoy getting in front of industry experts and hearing about what is affecting their particular areas and learning from this group. It's very, very helpful. So Barry asked me basically when I was looking at a presentation deck, what should I be speaking about? And I see that the focus here in this afternoon particularly is around supply chain disruptions. And he asked how that would impact the port and what does it look like? And I thought about that, and I most certainly will address to my ability some examples of what those look like. But I think in context of the port and what we do, I think it's important that I first of all talk about who are we and what do we do. And respectively, it allows a differentiation from this particular port and others in North America, down the coast, or even internationally, and how this differentiates. So some of those, and let me pull up my presentation here. So let me just start out with our general explanation of who we are. In a broad paintbrush, we're here to facilitate trade. And really what we're intended to do is act as an agent of the government in managing the federal lands that are designated to do so, as well as the waterways. And when we do that, to do it safely, efficiently, and to do it with First Nations, the environment, and local communities in mind. I think an important distinction when we talk about supply chain disruptions, the Port Authority is not involved in the day-to-day commercial transactions of business in the port. We're not involved in the terminal, side of decision-making, or in the supply chain partners like railway decisions as to when trains get delivered, nor are we directly involved in the day-to-day vessel scheduling and times of loading, etc. However, I will speak to in this about what our role is in ensuring efficiency is met and how we do that. I also wanted to address, I think, what I heard many people talk about in terms of moving cargo to their customers in describing the supply chain. I call that the big S supply chain. And in fact, what Vancouver as a port is several supply chains. I think that's an important distinction, because within each of those supply chains, there are operational decisions that are being made, and with the intent on creating efficiency, obviously, but often within a blinder's view of what other supply chains are doing, and therefore, without intent, making decisions with the hopes of optimizing efficiency, but in fact, to other supply chains within the gateway can sub-optimize what they are doing. And inadvertently, it then sub-optimizes the larger S supply chain. So I'm going to speak to a bit of that and how we differentiate those conversations. So this is the jurisdiction in a geographical sense. That represents about 360 kilometers of shoreline. All of the red areas are the foreshore that comes under our responsibility. The dark blue is the navigable waters that we're also responsible for navigation aids and safety of transit. And within this lies 2.4 million people. And what you don't see is the spider web of roads and rail network that's within that. Well, you do see some of the rail. And 16 municipalities with 16 different mayors and councils with different interests on what the land is used for and how we accommodate movement of cargo through it, as well as 35 traditional and treaty lands of the Coast Salish groups, First Nations. So as you can see, this creates some complexity in terms of the last mile when we come in to deliver goods to the terminals. So let's look at year to date as of October. This is the cargo patterns as compared to the same period in 2023. As you'll note, over total cargo saw a 5% increase year to date. That's on 140 million tons. That represents about the size of a new terminal. And that, although that is a higher rate than we had projected, we're still running on average between 2 and 3% growth of cargo movement through the gateway. That is extremely significant and means that all of the resiliency that we look to when we have disruptions also has to be talked about in context of this growth that's coming at us and how we prepare for the next 100,000 tons or 1,000,000 tons or tens of millions of tons, because it is coming. If we have capacity, that opportunity is there for Canada in GDP growth. So going through very quickly, auto was up last year 9%. Much of that was a recapture of, I guess, lost market due to the chip manufacturing issues, prevented export of import, I should say, of automobile volumes. About a 2.2% increase in coal. It's been relatively stable over the years, but continues to be our largest commodity actually moving through the port. Slight decrease, 2% in grain, but that again was measured as of October, and the transportation season had not ended at that point. Potash down about 3%, which from year to year could be very cyclical based on buying patterns of the global markets. Foreign break bulk down. Again, this is very relative to the cost of containerized cargo and the cost of moving goods via ship. As one has a benefit over the other, we see break bulk cargoes move between the two types of shipment. The foreign petroleum is a new growth area. It's the largest step increase in tonnage at the port in our history, and that is the result of the TMX twinning of the pipeline and the beginning of the export of petroleum products out of the Westridge terminal. That's representing over 300 new vessel movements, and I'll speak more to that and what that means in terms of mitigating supply chain impacts. Containers up 15%, TEUs, again, some of that recovery from lost opportunities in global supply chain disruptions, containers being in the wrong place for the movement of goods when they wanted to move, and or cargoes or containers being moved without cargo in them in order to get them to Asia to take care of the large supply backlog when it was recovering from the disruptions. And then cruise, 7% increase, over 103 million passengers through Vancouver. Does not directly impact a lot of the supply chain details I'm talking about, but is extremely important to the local regions in terms of economic activity and the downstream spend effects of those passengers. Very quickly, largest commodities moving through the port prior to TMX, coal moving through there, followed by grain and related grain products, fertilizers, including potash and sulfur, forest products, everything from chips, logs, lumber, pulp, paper, etc. And then chemical, it's a catch-all category, chemicals, basic metals, and minerals, rounding out the largest tonnage movements. Containerized cargo, if you look at the red line, that was that's 2024 year to date as of August, and you'll see that line is running above last year as well as 2019, which was one of the largest record movement of containers, and you'll see we're exceeding those numbers as of August of this year. This is all setting up to speak to that growth and what we need to do in terms of supply chain resilience. Our demand forecast, this is all the commodities showing very strong growth within the gateway. Again, we had forecast 2 to 3% growth rates, but we're we're just seeing now in the recent year to date that that's actually exceeding up to 5%. Examples. So when we talk about how do we create resilience in the gateway, part of it is keeping up with that demand so we have excess capacity to take on that additional cargo when issues occur, such as supply chain disruptions, such as strikes are a little more difficult to deal with in terms of if it's a terminal being shut down, but in terms of being able to accommodate movement of cargoes that are destined for the terminals, if you have latent capacity, you can absorb some of that into the terminal. Terminal expansion projects we have been directly involved and invested into include the Centerm expansion, which was completed last year. I think you've heard that industrial land is an extremely short supply in the Vancouver region. In this case, we built and built out the Centerm expansion on only a 15% increase in footprint. And working with DP World, we're able to look at reconfiguration of this terminal, including rail access, truck access, and the use of newer technologies to increase efficiencies, and realized a 60% increase in the throughput capacity of that terminal, up to from 900,000 to 1.5 million TEUs, 20-foot equivalent units, if you're not familiar with the terminology. And Roberts Bank Terminal 2, we talk about building infrastructure in Vancouver, but not just in Vancouver, I would argue across the country. It's not easy. In fact, this particular project, which saw a generational increase in container throughput capacity, has been worked on for well over 10 years. And 10 years of that was put through the environmental assessment process, which in anybody other jurisdiction would be just, they would cross their eyes at you. It's taking too long to bring on critical infrastructure into the gateway, and we're hearing it in many sectors in terms of economic development. However, we're moving well ahead, and we anticipate we're right now getting through many of the requirements under that environmental assessment to meet Fisheries Act requirements, which we're checking off those boxes, and engineering will be underway shortly in terms of reclaiming land to create that peninsula, which currently doesn't exist. We're forced to build land out in the ocean in order to accommodate the type of growth of step functions that we need. These are also the key pillars for ensuring that the gateway can handle future growth, and that is the Port Authority-led gateway projects, together with our supply chain partners like CN, CP, and the province and the federal government, in debottlenecking the access from our shippers to the terminals. And these primarily involve road and rail grade separations to ensure, again, we can move what we move most efficiently at greater speed and greater volumes. So this is just a depiction of the projects that are currently either underway, shovels in ground, under development in engineering, and or on the planning books, and working with our supply chain partners to facilitate. These are some of those examples. The one on the left is a key feature. I'll focus on that. The Burnaby Rail Corridor Improvements Project, or a suite of projects that include the sea-end ventilation of a tunnel through its network over these second narrows to that point that was mentioned earlier into North Vancouver, where all of those important terminals are for grain, for potash, for coal. This is one of those suite of projects, which includes the Hold'em Overpass. And why this is important is it is a bottleneck currently. It is a crossing that is critically used by the city of Burnaby, and also prevents the most effective use of the rail access onto the North Shore. By creating this, we're able to stage trains at the east end of the Thornton Tunnel, and allowing for them to then facilitate openings and move the maximum number of trains into the North Shore where we can. It secondarily provides the city of Burnaby, I should say, with a more fluid flow of commuter traffic, and for their first responders and their supplies, and it debottlenecks their communities. So it's a win-win opportunity. Those projects are dotted and virtually mimicked in the other two slides, or the other two examples next to them. And this, I think, is the report card of that kind of work. This is private investment into the gateway once they understood that the access to the terminals was being looked into. We look at those projects 15, 20 years out, in part because we have to. We have to ensure we create capacity for these private investments, but also it takes that long to get it through approval processes and the building processes. So we're very much future focused. The Neptune example was only the investment since 2021. The total investment in upgrades for the coal portion of that terminal was well over $1 billion in the last 7 years. So they've effectively been able to rationalize all the coal movement, or most of their coal movement, into this terminal. And similarly with Richardson, with their expansion of their terminal, and with the rail yard expansion at 25 million, and the PCT delivered liquid bulk for canola oil and for other liquid properties, as well as previous investments into their potash for K+S. So it's not just about bricks and mortar. It's not just about building things, which we began doing outside of our jurisdiction just 10, 15 years ago. And that was because we realized that what impacts us at the port often happens outside of our jurisdiction. So where we can affect change to allow for a more fluid operation, to allow for capacity increases, made sense. And that's where we got involved together with the federal government and other supply chain partners into tri-party investments into those projects I was referring to. This is the other side that is obvious for many who are in the supply chain, and that is measuring and monitoring and the digital representation of how goods move. When I said the supply chains, the small s, are really what is comprised of the big S supply chain. This is an effort for us to have a better visibility into what the global health of the big S supply chain is. On the marine side, we're working on initiatives around active vessel traffic management that involves the prioritization, the active prioritization of vessel movement. In the past, it was left to other supply chain partners on individual decision-making criteria. We decided to create a commercial rationale to be included into decision of when vessels move, so that we minimize conflicts on the marine side as we now see additional marine traffic occurring. Predictive analytics for knowing when vessels are going to be where they need to be, when they'll be there, when they need to access things like the Second Narrows rail bridge, and how we can optimize those crossings relative to rail movements. Container truck optimization. We've been working on this feature for a number of years, including the truck licensing system, which ensures we can identify all trucks that need to access port lands. And we then insist on the intermodal licensing of those trucks to then have them install GPS transceivers so that we can track and monitor what they're doing, and allows us not to rely on anecdotal reports of activities, but actually be able to see them in real time, and allows us to search out the root problems and uncover where we can apply resources for optimization. And then visualization tools for rail movements are coming at us in the future, in dashboards, and to optimize the Second Narrows, as I mentioned, and creating digital twins so that we can look at different applications of what supply chain volumes might move at any given time and how that impacts supply chains. I mentioned the centralized scheduling system. The other piece is port anchorages, a limited resource for which it is being pushed, particularly during supply chain disruptions, to the point where we had vessels that could not find anchor, which is a safety issue. It's also a commercial viability issue. We need to be able to have vessels close to terminals when they need to transact business. We need vessels that are not going to be transacting business in any reasonable amount of time to perhaps schedule or to facilitate their anchorage at a anchorage spots further away from the port jurisdiction. And if they're full, to then relay information to the charters, to the vessel shippers, so that they can take mitigation efforts like slow steaming and or altering destination ports if necessary or if possible. So direct items relative to supply chain resilience, I just noted down a few bullets here. It's in the context of the larger capacity discussion, because there's constant work obviously already afoot, but other side agreements you may or may not be aware of, or initiatives, I should say. One includes an agreement with the inland terminal at Ashcroft to study opportunities for surge capacity in the event we have issues. As you know, we had a multiple series of outages over the years, including fires, floods. We actually had a point at which the entire region of Vancouver was cut off from all of Canada due to floods. We had COVID impacts. We had COVID-related supply chain, we call it bullwhip effects, in which when production stopped, it created a void in North America through which a huge thrust of supply was trying to fill demand, which created transportation issues, which changed pricing dynamics. All of that are visualized in terms of what do we do if something like this happens. And sure enough, they're happening continuously with labor issues, with the Red Sea, with the Panama and other supply chain issues, which inadvertently do have major impacts on global transportation networks. Growing overall capacity through site projects, I mentioned that, to increase capacity, efficiency of road and rail networks in the jurisdiction, increase opportunities around short sea shipping. And that would be finding alternative means to move cargoes that would then take away from impeding, for example, truck traffic in the major corridors within the Vancouver region. Efforts to map the shoreline. We've been in the last number of years doing satellite depictions of all the properties around the port to understand where the risks are in terms of global tides rising. It is happening, and we are looking at mitigation efforts to address where we need to reinforce areas to create operational decisions or create operational awareness for those that need to trigger operational changes when those events happen. For example, during a high tide storm during a full moon, which happens to be an exceptional high tide. Utilization of unused port lands has been used in the past and will be used again. We do have lands that are held in abeyance by the port for future development. We will operationalize those for laydown areas, whether it be for empty containers or import steel products, to relieve the pressure at the docks so that we don't become bottlenecked at the terminal. Those efforts are fully operationalized within our operations department, and we regularly meet with our supply chain partners at the terminals, the railways, trucking companies to go through tabletop exercises about how those might occur during an event. And we work with and support the National Supply Chain Office and Robert's group, work hand in hand around a common interest, which is to ensure movement of goods through this gateway on behalf of Canadians. And I'm remiss if I don't mention this, because within all of that technical supply chain discussion, there is the fact that we sit in a big fishbowl called Vancouver. And you have millions of eyeballs on what we do and how we do it. And arguably one of the most pristine areas in terms of just the environment, in terms of use by First Nations, in terms of tourism, and in terms of the wildlife and infrastructure. These are examples of just a few of the efforts that the port has to be involved in order to demonstrate that we are stewards of the port, looking after our responsibilities appropriately. And this does not It does two things. It does what we should be doing because it's the right thing to do, but it also shows the local communities, First Nations, and interested groups that we're doing so in a way that's responsible, and it gives us an opportunity to continue with 3, 4, 5% growth rates without scaring people to becoming opponents to those growth projects. So these will always be part of that discussion. And I think that's the end of my slide deck. So I will stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Doug. Great presentation, both of Marc and Doug. I noticed that there is a couple of comments on here. One comment was referring to the G3 terminal, which was just about $1 billion. That's also North Shore. I wouldn't want to miss that one. Going back to Marc, there was a comment here, and I don't know whether it's a comment or a question, but I'm going to make it a question because it refers to the passenger rail corridor that is connecting Toronto and Quebec City, that's under discussion by Via Rail right now. I'm wondering, Marc, if that is a bonus for the freight transportation ultimately, because it would reduce the amount of passenger traffic on that line. Is that part of the consideration as to promoting that, is to make that freight corridor better and give it greater capacity?
Yeah, so the what you're referring to is what was originally referred to as HFR, high frequency rail. I think it's kind of morphed into HSR, high speed rail. There's a lot of discussion. There's still a lot of unknowns, but there were 3 consortiums that have submitted bids. Those bids were submitted this past summer. These bids were intended to look at what it would take in order to build out a network like that, a dedicated rail corridor for passenger rail. My understanding was that the federal government was going to potentially announce the winning bid before the end of Christmas, but I think it's going to extend into 2025. Listen, at the end of the day, it's a win-win. If the economics, if the ability to create a dedicated corridor for passenger railway between Quebec City and Toronto does come to fruition, it will mean a win for passengers who take the train, because you're on a dedicated track as opposed to predominantly on CN track. And then for the freight, it ensures that both freight railways, and in particular here CN, because again, Via Rail runs predominantly on the CN track, that it would protect their ability to continue to meet the growing demand for freight capacity, because that's the challenge, right? We want to ensure that our Class 1s continue to deliver the goods that Canadian businesses and the Canadian economy needs, but to not be restricted by the fact that you currently have passenger railway running on freight tracks. So it is a win-win for passenger and a win for freight capacity as well.
This one is for Doug. It's from Paul. He says, "Great presentation, Doug. The port is a landlord, water lord, environment lord, and increasingly data lords. Can you speak to a bit more to how data and information is being shared within the port, the supply chains, and other port authorities around the globe?"
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've known for some time that measuring the activity is very important in 2 frames. One is to maximize operational efficiency. The second is to ensure that the investments that you originally made are being used to their maximum. And before you have your hand out for the next bridge or for the next big project, be able to demonstrate that you're utilizing those assets responsibly. So all that to say is this has been an effort ongoing for some time. Happy to report that we have recent written agreements for data exchanges with both CPKC and CN. As well, we do have with all of our terminal operators. We're moving from sector to sector carefully. And I raise that because of my description of the supply chain earlier. The idiosyncrasies between supply chains can be quite dramatic. And we want to ensure that we understand them before we delve too deeply into them. However, I think in terms of sharing that data globally, I think we've seen how that happens in some of the reports we've seen internationally about port productivity, et cetera. You can't compare apples and oranges. The Port of Vancouver is unique in the variety of products that we handle. We're arguably the most diversified port in North America. And at the same time, we're larger than the next 3 Canadian ports combined. So that is a big funnel with a lot moving through it. All that to say is that same situation doesn't necessarily exist at other ports around the world. LA Long Beach is primarily a container port. Port of Houston is primarily a liquid bulk with some dry bulk handling capacity. There's very few that have the variety of products that are moving as we do. And to give them an anecdote of what we see in our data for them to learn from could be problematic, because they don't realize the impacts of those decisions I was talking about that can either bolster the entire supply chain or sub-optimize the global supply chain and therefore other takers. So I don't believe we're trying to hang on to that information. We just want to make sure that it's properly understood before we utilize it for whatever myriad of purposes it could be used for. Hope that answers your question.
I think it's a good answer. I'm going to go back to Marc. And this is my question. You made in one of your slides, you were referring to the collaboration, and specifically one of your items was regarding labor issues. How would the stakeholder community or the participants in the supply chain help in a collaborative fashion to mitigate some of the labor disruption? I'm don't mean to put you on the spot about that one, but it really kind of piqued my interest, because it's something that I think is on a lot of people's minds. We've already heard about it today.
Yeah, so I think the best way for me to answer that is maybe to kind of look back at what's happened the last year and a half, 2 years, where when one part of the supply chain goes down, it's got a wide domino effect on shippers, on communities, on employees, on employers. If the rail line is down because of a labor dispute where they couldn't, you couldn't get resolution through collective bargaining, but then binding arbitration was being delayed because of circumstances and challenges there. Collectively, we all felt that. It wasn't just the railway employees that weren't going to work. It wasn't just the railway companies that weren't running their trains. It was having a domino effect. So when I say, collectively, I think we need to work together on labor disruptions and work stoppages, because it has an impact on the economy, on families, on workers, on plants, so on and so forth. And again, I think, the one thing that, we have advocated for is that if collective bargaining doesn't work for whatever reason, then there should be a mechanism where binding arbitration comes to the forefront quickly here, because you can have a small union, shut down an entire network. And I think, again, as a country, we should be concerned about its impact on the economy, on our reputation, on our ability to make sure that our goods get to market. And so I think, again, it's having that collective ability to come together and solve that or recommend things collectively that I think would benefit all of us. And again, ensuring the predictability and reliability of our labor stability going forward.
Thanks, Mark. Don't see any questions coming up in the chat right now, but I'm looking at Barry. Barry's sitting there going, "Oh, I got questions."
I always got a question, but actually I've got a comment, just as I'm listening to this, what gems we have in terms of the railway system and the ports. I mean, these are privately funded, and the railways, contributing 2.2 billion in taxes. Most countries are subsidizing their railways. They're not paying taxes to them. And the ports, I know, Doug, you may comment a bit more on this. The U.S. airports, by contrast, are hugely subsidized versus the Port of Vancouver and our Canadian ports, and yet they're performing very well. The other thing that struck me in this discussion is the comment about the growth of volume going through the port and the investment. Because two things we heard in this conference was about lagging productivity, and of course we hear in the radio almost every day that the economy is not doing that well, that maybe we're already in a recession, so on. But in contrast, what I see is this increased volume moving through the ports, and the railways certainly are busy. And so it's not on the goods movement side that we have this recessionary period. It's consumer purchasing power. And of course, that leads us back to the first of this day where we talked about food prices. It's not just food prices, it's cost of living that's making everything strange. So it's interesting to hear that the goods movement side and the supply chains for exports are actually not following that pattern. It's a very different stream. So just a comment, maybe you could comment on it yourselves.
Yeah, I could, a couple things I could speak to. Yeah, the contrast between other port authorities and Canadian port authorities, particularly in the US, they generally are governed by a harbor commission, and that harbor commission is locally elected, and they subsequently collect much of their revenue from taxation, and therefore much of the investment has to show significant local benefit if they care to get reelected. I think the founders of the Canada Marine Act and the establishment of the ports in Canada thought about it the right way, and that is to create a federal focus for all of Canada to ensure that we have capacity to be able to trade, and that investments are made not just for local benefit, but for the benefit of all across Canada. The other feature I'd be a little cautionary on is using our global numbers to necessarily indicate a positiveness or a negative impact on any one supply chain, because we tend to blend out opportunities and dips in supply chain cycles. For example, the cost of things, inevitably is going up, in part because of global impacts on supply, in part because of container import issues in supplying what is needed for the global economy. And when one group starts to see that, as I said, that downturn, we saw incredible increases or rebounds in other markets. So your point is taken. We're healthy as a port authority. I would not want to be the economist in the room and be able to say that that's going to dictate what the economy looks like as a result moving forward. So anyway, I leave you with that.
Just one more point on that, Doug. The other big difference between Canadian ports and US ports, as an example, is their ability to raise capital is considerably different. And I don't know that a lot of people are aware of that.
Right.
They have the ability to borrow money, whereas Canadian ports do not really.
Well, we're limited in the amount of money that we can borrow, and typically there's positives and negatives to it. They can access capital for large infrastructure projects, and I believe the federal government, when they want to, can inject a significant amount of funds directly into a port jurisdiction facility. In our jurisdiction in Canada, the federal government is precluded from making direct investment into port jurisdiction, but they can participate in off-jurisdiction investments that support the supply chain. So it's a little more complicated, but your point is taken.
My another question here, again from Paul, a joint port and rail question. We've heard that TMX will create about 300 additional ship calls per year, which I guess is 600 additional transits under the Second Narrows Bridge. Any early assessment of the impacts on the train throughput to and from the North Shore due to the additional bridge lifts? I know that we've done some analysis on that, but Doug, I think you're more aware.
Yeah, so we've been working closely with CN, the government, in terms of how we ramped up the opening of the TMX, including initiatives like AVTM, Advanced Vessel Traffic Management. And those were specifically intended to pull latent capacity out of that system, given the constraints that were in the environment at the time. For example, Canada Marine Act provides vessels with the priority in terms of transiting, and therefore trains have to wait if a vessel requires movement. That creates an operational planning nightmare and restricted the capacity in terms of measuring it over time in real terms. That the vessels, however, are also restricted by tides and nighttime transits, because those full tankers, we're very, very careful that we don't want to be another Baltimore. So we restrict the access under that bridge, as well as they must be tied to two tugs when they're transiting, and they cannot move during an active tidal flow. So all this puts a lot of pressure onto the windows that are available, not to mention local sailboats that want to transit. So what we're doing now is two things. Those suite of projects that I mentioned are meant to provide more opportunity for rail to move when the bridge is down. Secondly, we're working with within our jurisdiction to influence windows of opportunity for vessels to move, so the trains can then have certainty as to when they will cross the bridge. And we're also looking at future opportunities to adjust the Marine Act to allow for exceptions in the gateway, given the vital infrastructure that is the Second Narrows to support the North Vancouver network of terminals. So all that to say, we've done rail modeling. We believe that, given what has been reported to us from the terminals on the North Shore, and even given the additional 300 per year vessels that will move through under the bridge, we see that the capacity exists for the growth patterns, at least through the next 5-6 years. We're just revising those modelings right now to incorporate other possible options that we're thinking about. But yeah, we're very, very focused on ensuring we do not reduce capacity of the North Shore. And by the way, TMX, the purveyors of TMX have been extremely helpful in supplying resources for us to model this through various computer patterns to ensure that they're not negatively impacting that rail network as well.
Marc, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. I thought Doug's answer was very thorough. So
Yeah. Just as a side, we'd only done the first 3 months of that operation, and we didn't see anything that was significant, but we continue to look at it as well. I could ask about a dozen more questions, but Barry, I think we've covered the covered the territory here. I'll turn it back
Thank
to you.
Thank you
Thanks
much.
very much, Doug. Mark, this was a great conversation, presentations.
Thank you, Mark.
Very much, both Marks and Doug, and for your great presentations. Let me just sum up a few concluding marks over the course of it. Like, what are the themes that we heard? And certainly we started out, talking about food prices, and food prices have gone up, but it doesn't appear that the same kind of escalation is ahead of us, except for a couple of areas. Certainly the beef prices being one, and the fruits and vegetables because of the exchange rates. Other than that, this new code of conduct may help things a little better. So there's a bit of good news on that side, but we'll wait and see. What is maybe the most shocking is that for a country as rich as Canada to have so many people that are food insecure is rather surprising. But I noticed in that data that also higher than food prices was residents and homes and housing and everything else. A lot of things going up. So it's probably more just a general pinch on consumers. And one of the things that you can't not do without is food. So this is something that we are buying, and perhaps may also explain some of the slowdown we're seeing in the economy when people are not making these other discretionary purchases simply because they don't have the money. But hopefully that changes. Clearly, where you are and who you are matters in terms of food and food prices, and the North is particularly affected, and certainly the effort of the food banks to try and alleviate some of that, and new initiatives coming along. But also some of these issues are just chronic problems, and some getting worse. Certainly the ice roads being one, and the cost of aviation being another. There is a solution that we've been talking about for a long time with the airships. I hope that will come to fruition sooner rather than later, because it looks like the climate change is not stopping. In fact, that was a theme that we heard throughout the entire day. I don't think a single speaker did not reference climate change in one way or another. And of course, this is not news, but it's just something that is progressive. The question of, after lunch, looking at this issue of productivity, and as I mentioned earlier, just this notion that where is that productivity lacking? It doesn't seem to be lacking in terms of investment at the ports. So maybe this is something more endemic in the rest of the economy rather than in our supply chains that are serving. And this a question of uncertainty in terms of trade that Carlo Dade brought up, and certainly Jill also raised this in terms of we're not certain what's going to happen in the future. We're hopeful that things aren't going to be quite as disruptive as the news might have us believe. But there are certainly issues out there in terms of long-standing problems with non-tariff barriers and others that are not resolved and still need to be worked on. The last closing session really brought to line in my mind that the railways and the ports are the anchor tenants of the supply chain. And Doug, to your comment, I think that one of the themes is this notion of the big S supply chain and the small S supply chain. Those of us who work in this area understand that you can't compare the supply chain for furniture with the supply chain for automobiles or coal or anything else. Each supply chain is unique, and of course, in many cases, they're also competing for capacity within the ports and the railways and other modes of transport. So there's a natural issue that not all supply chains are going to get along, and also not all supply chains are going to be moving at the same speed. Some will be advancing quickly and some will be advancing more slowly. And I think you gave a very nice presentation in terms of what we saw. So with that, I will close. Again, thank you everyone for attending the 29th Fields on Wheels, and thank you to all our speakers and chairs for your great presentations and work to inform us. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. I also wish to acknowledge Chris, our man behind the scenes looking after the Zoom, and certainly the plan is to edit these recordings and make them available for everybody. So if someone wants to go back and see a certain section, or those who couldn't attend today could see them, they will be available in a few weeks or so. Also, of course, to the other members of the Transport Institute the Department of Agriculture, who also participated in helping us get the message out and preparing things. Thank you to those folks as well. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and wish you well, and have a Merry Christmas. Bye for now.